So, house rules essentially set expectations for the tenant. These clear expectations allow for better communication and understanding between you and your tenants. They should be included in your lease or your rental agreement. And from time to time, when there's a violation, you're going to have to deal with it by clearly and professionally communicating the issue at hand along with all the consequences. Welcome to your Landlord Resource Podcast. Many moons ago, when I started as a landlord, I was as green as it gets. I may have had my real estate license, but I lacked confidence and the hands-on experience needed when it came to dealing with tenants, leases, maintenance, and bookkeeping. After many failed attempts, fast forward to today, Kevin and I have doubled our doors and created an organized, professionally operated rental property business. Want to go from overwhelmed to confident? If you're an ambitious landlord or maybe one in the making, join us as we provide strategies and teach actionable steps to help you reach your goals and the lifestyle you desire, all while building a streamlined and profitable rental property business. This is your Landlord Resource Podcast. Hey there, landlords, and welcome to the Your Landlord Resource Podcast. I am your host, Stacy, and I'm here with my business partner and partner in life, Kevin.
Hello there, listeners.
So, Kev, today's subject is one that we have never really specifically focused on. I mean, we have discussed leases, and quite frankly, house rules are the basic underlying principles that a lease is created around, don't you think?
Yeah, I just think that in leases, what items that would be included as house rules are much like addendums because they can differ by property. I mean, leases themselves are protections against not paying rent, advising of security deposits, and stating laws and regulations required by the state. Like here in California, we have to include information about things like, bed bugs, mold, lead, and if your property is in a flood zone. Now, house rules for tenants, which is what we'll be discussing today, can be more personal, so a basic state specific lease may not cover these items in depth. My point being, if you feel strongly about a quote unquote rule, then under house rules or in addendums is where you want to specify your exact terms.
Exactly. So, the importance of house rules cannot be overstated. Your house rules will establish clear expectations between you and your tenant because, believe it or not, tenants do need these guidelines to ensure a peaceful living environment and experience for themselves and any other tenants in the property. And we wholeheartedly agree that house rules define the expectations you have for your tenants when it comes to responsibility, respect, and behavior. Essentially, you are creating boundaries to minimize any issues or disagreements that may arise down the line. For us, many of the rules we are talking about today are a bit obvious. However, for many of you, your own rules likely will arise from errors in judgment or prior lack of detail that led you to a place of frustration. For example, I have a family member that owns a single family home rental, and when the internet became a big deal, he had a tenant that ran internet cables under his rental home. That doesn't sound bad, right? Well, it wasn't until that tenant drilled half-inch holes in his 100-year-old home hardwood floors so that those cables could be pushed up through the floor and into every single room of the house. Now, mind you, this family member is an electrician and knows how to bring wiring up through walls to avoid holes in the floors. But the tenants did not call and ask, they just did it themselves.
And now that the internet is essentially wireless, everyone who walks in the place is wondering, why are all these holes in the floors? So hopefully you can understand Stacy's point here. He never told them they couldn't drill holes in the beautiful hardwood floors of his home. So they just said, well, we didn't know because it wasn't in the lease. Yeah, so now every lease he has, there's an addendum about holes that states the places they're allowed, how many, and the minimum size allowed without being charged a repair fee. So let's start talking about the most common house rules that should be included in your lease or rental agreement. I think I want to start with discussing ensuring a peaceful living environment. This is an important one because no matter where your property is located or what landlord tenant laws apply, the right to peaceful enjoyment is something that all tenants must abide by. It's an unspoken or undocumented rule that applies to absolutely everyone. In this case, we're talking about your tenants and their neighbors, regardless of whether that neighbor is another tenant of yours or not. The first one is that you must establish noise regulations. Now, in our lease, we have specifics on noise levels and quiet hours to prevent noise complaints and disturbances. This can be noise from a radio, or maybe they play in a band and hold band practice in the garage. This also applies to their dog barking and revving motors on muscle cars or motorcycles. And there might be city ordinances as well. Most cities have noise ordinances that go into effect at night, say after 10 p.m. However, I believe in Scottsdale, Arizona, they have a noise ordinance that applies during the daytime hours as well. All that information should be included in your lease if it applies.
Yeah, one thing we have heard ourselves when working at our units is someone being really loud while they're gaming. They get those headsets on and start screaming, and they just don't realize how loud they are.
I mean, we did have to have a talk with the tenant about that, didn't we? I mean, it's usually our youngest yelling at his friends to help him out or get them, and that's the tamest we've heard.
Yeah, I mean, people that game can be obnoxiously loud, and not to mention the expletives that come from that too. So it's super important to address any noise complaints right away. It's kind of tough to show up your unit a week after there's a noise event and discuss it with someone, as they're likely not going to remember and they're going to blow you off. Make a call right away and advise them that there's been a complaint filed regarding noise in their unit. You need to be polite yet firm when discussing the situation with the tenant. Remind them of the rules regarding noise, and if you need to, send them the signed page of the lease that refers to the rules about noise and what the consequences are when they're violated. Give them a warning and then hope that it never happens again.
So, the next thing we have in our lease that also pertains to ensuring a peaceful environment is about illegal substances or items. Marijuana, illegal drugs, fireworks, explosives, and even illegal guns can be focused on here. You can require that anyone with a legal or registered gun to keep it contained in a locked box. This can save you and the tenant from any accidents happening, especially if you are going in for repairs and inspections, or if you have a team member going into the unit, like our contractor often does. Rules on illegal substances, gun safety, etc., ensure the safety and well being of all occupants. So you might not think this is a thing, but the right to peaceful enjoyment also includes cleanliness. And you do not need to have a hoarder situation on your hands to worry about cleanliness. We have a friend who is a property manager and got a call from a tenant that little flying bugs were coming through the electrical outlets in their units. Now, this was a 20-story high-end building in downtown San Francisco, not your run-of-the-mill duplex or triplex where there might be a whole house infestation. They got there right away to investigate and found out they were fruit flies. After checking with other tenants, they found there was an issue with the unit next door. When they went into this unit, there were so many fruit flies that the unit looked like it had smoke in it. What they found was pizza that had been left out on the counter, dirty dishes in the sink, and a fruit bowl where all the fruit had rotted. Now, the rest of the unit was fairly clean and tidy, but this tenant decided to leave town and not clean up their food for some odd reason. The fruit flies were finding their way into the electrical plugs and switches and migrating to the other units on either side of it.
Yeah, and we have had this experience as well. And we found the issue after the tenant had set a bomb and killed most of them, but did find that the flies were in the walls behind the switch plates. And as I've said before, with their eggs on the wires to our hardwired smoke and carbon detectors.
So I'm going to sideline here for a quick second. There was, I guess there still is, a bakery near us. And we didn't go there often, but there was a time when the fire department was called because someone was walking by after hours and thought there was smoke inside. I imagine you can guess that the smoke was not a fire, but it was swarming fruit flies instead. I mean, Stacy still gags about this story today.
Oh god, I do. And I have never stepped foot in that bakery again.
Well, I guess the good thing is this happened, I mean, a long time ago before social media and cell phone cameras. So luckily, the reputation of the bakery is still intact.
I know, but can you imagine? I mean, fruit flies happen really fast, and I get it. I've had them here in the house before when we have produce from the tomatoes and things like that. But to have such a swarm that it looks like smoke,
So Stacy's cousin, who's a police officer and told her this story, said he was on that call. And when they went in, they couldn't see the back wall. It was so.
yeah, I mean, that's some serious fruit flies. And I will add that they were closed for several weeks after to clean that up. And they did everything right after the fact, but I'm telling you, I still can't go in there. And don't worry, they're doing just fine without my business.
But the funny thing is, your cousin still goes in there, right?
He does. It's so gross. Anyway, all right. So the point here is that bugs and flies can multiply very quickly. So encourage your tenants to keep their units clean. And if you do get a maintenance request, respond quickly. We have said this a few times, but here's a reminder. When a tenant calls to report a problem, respond to them as soon as possible. Now, the response doesn't have to be the solution, but just acknowledge that you have received the request and that you're going to begin working on remedying it right away. You need to put their minds at ease. Let them know you're responsible and you take their request seriously. Even if the request is something that you're going to roll your eyes at, like a burnt out light bulb or something silly like that. Keep them in the loop whenever you get new information. For instance, if the refrigerator is not keeping food cold and you need to send a tech out there to check it out, your first response back to the tenant will be something like, I'm so sorry to hear your refrigerator is not working correctly. Please make sure the temperature dials have not been accidentally turned down. And if they have not, consider getting a cooler filled with ice to place your perishables in while we find someone to come out and evaluate why it's not staying cold. And then when you hear from the tech and schedule the appointment, let the tenant know so you can find out if they can meet the tech themselves, which is better so they can explain the issue, or if you're going to need to go out there and meet them yourself.
Right. So when you promptly address maintenance issues, that alone removes any possibility of them claiming you violated their right to peaceful enjoyment. You've lowered their anxiousness and worked to diffuse what could easily turn into a nasty situation should you had ignored them and just put them off.
Yeah, and not to mention that when you are prompt to respond and make them feel secure and happy about living in your unit, there's a higher likelihood they're going to take better care of your unit. Okay, so we got off on a bit of a tangent there with the right to peaceful enjoyment, but it's a huge part of house rules that, as you can see, works on both sides for the tenant and the landlord as well. So, house rules essentially set expectations for the tenant. These clear expectations allow for better communication and understanding between you and your tenants. They should be included in your lease or your rental agreement. And from time to time, when there's a violation, you're going to have to deal with it by clearly and professionally communicating the issue at hand along with all the consequences. Okay, so let's get into some common house rules for you to consider. First up, smoking. For us, we absolutely do not allow smoking anywhere in or on our properties. And if I'm being totally honest here, if an applicant smokes, we will likely not accept their application in the first place. But that doesn't mean that they have it in the past and can take it back up again. Plus, you have to consider your tenants will have guests over and they may smoke.
Yeah, that's right. Our fruit fly flood alcoholic tenant we had smoked. Never in the unit, but out on the porch in front of the unit with the door open. I mean, he also left his cigarette butts everywhere, which is frustrating as hell. I mean, we discussed it with him several times, but mind you, this was during COVID and he had lost his job. So we were pretty much shit out of luck getting him out because of a smoking violation.
Yeah, so the issue is not that they smoke. If they want to take part in that, that's their choice. It's how the smoke affects your unit and if you own a multifamily, the other tenants on the property. The smoke on their clothing and the smell they carry in with them will absolutely absorb into the porous surfaces of your unit. So, if you want to clearly set guidelines, inform your tenants about the harmful effects of smoking and the reasons for the no smoking policy. Here in California, this is one law that is on our side as landlords, as it's illegal to smoke anywhere in public. And we can absolutely have a house rule where no smoking in our units or on our property is allowed. If you want to allow smoking outside, our suggestion is to create a designated smoking area off in a corner that's not going to directly affect your property or the neighbors that are surrounding it.
And one more thought is to deter your tenants from smoking on property is to include a fine they have to pay should they get caught. And you can scale this up on a like first, second, third time offense type of fee with eviction if caught after 3 times or something like that. Okay, now let's talk about pets. Whether you allow them or not, you must have something written in your lease addressing pets. And I'm not talking ESAs or service animals. I'm talking about good old pets. If you want to know more about ESAs, our last podcast was all about them, so check it out. We'll put a link in the show notes for you. Now, I will stop here and let you know that there are over 20 states and many, many more local authorities that are looking at forcing landlords to accept pets. Yep, you heard that correctly. You, as a landlord, would have to accept a tenant who has a pet, which I believe is absolutely asinine. I mean, the government can make a pull for rent control, saying that there are people who can't find affordable housing to live in. I mean, I get that. I don't agree it should be forced upon us, but I understand it. But to say that rental property owners have to accept pets is a little ridiculous. For a single family home, maybe. For a multifamily complex with small units like we have, no way can a dog be locked up in there all day while the tenant is out at work. Not to mention the noise disturbances to the other tenants and neighbors that are less than 10 feet away. Don't get us wrong, pets are great. I mean, we have our lab Gracie. She is definitely part of the family, but she is an animal, not a human. When we get to the point where pets have the same human rights to our units as our tenants do, then we have a real problem to deal with on our hands.
Yeah, as you can see, Kevin, as well as myself, we're pretty fired up about this. If you feel the same, we suggest you stay on top of your state and local government to see where they stand on this subject. You can join associations that can keep you up on changes, as well as to combat any laws that would affect landlord tenant laws that may be changing out of your favor. All right, we're going to jump off the political train now and get back to house rules for pets. If you do allow pets, some regulations you can set are that they must be registered with you and must provide proof of vaccination and that they are licensed in your local county. That tenants are responsible for any damage caused by the pet and are liable for the cost of all those repairs. That the pet must be well behaved and not disruptive to other tenants or neighbors, as well as being kept on a leash when outside, and that the owners have to clean up after and dispose of their waste properly. Now, you can include in your house rules about pets that there cannot be any aggressive or dangerous breeds. However, and I don't want to get in the middle of a war about breeds here, use caution when you're defining breeds as all being aggressive. All dogs, including our Labrador Retriever, have the potential to be aggressive. Gracie certainly can sound scary when someone comes to the door. And the point is, you just don't know. There are plenty of small yappy dogs out there that bite too.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think maybe it's better to actually vet the pet as you would your tenant. This means you can speak with the previous landlord about the pet to see if there were any issues. Their veterinarian is also a good place to start, as they have had one on one time with the animal as well. At the very least, make sure your house rules state that the pets are not allowed in common areas. Again, make it clear of the consequences should there be any violations caused by the pet. And the last thing I want to say is that we know the people over at Our Pet Policy. We have had one of their founders, Logan Miller, on for an interview last year. I believe it was episode 36, and the discussion was more about ESAs, but their company is an app where you can manage all of the pets you have registered on your properties. They can help you vet the pets as well as handle ESA verifications too. I believe we have an offer with them that any new client we send their way gets 3 months of service for free. We will link all of this in the show notes for you, but they're a great place to start if you allow pets in your units. Okay, so let's move on to waste disposal and recycling. This is one where we did not have to really address until recently, when our city mandated we have compost bins along with our recycling bins and dumpster for trash. With that demand came violations for us as the property owners if the tenants did not properly sort and dispose of their trash. And we get it. In California and many major cities, we are running out of room to dump the trash. So if we can compost or recycle a bulk of it, it helps out with the landfill situation. The problem is, how are we supposed to monitor if our tenants are sorting correctly, if at all? We have gotten email reminders that our bins were not placed out for pickup and that if we did not comply, we would get fined. So that was great. Bottom line, if you find yourself in the same position, include a copy of the sorting chart that is likely online with your trash provider, with the lease, and in the unit. You can maybe laminate it and put it under the sink, or like we do, and include it in the unit binder for them to reference to. Your house rule should include information on how to separate and sort the trash, indicating what can go in what bins and what cannot, like furniture or electronics we often see. Along those lines, provide your tenants with the names and locations of disposal facilities so they can dump the unauthorized items themselves. And lastly, when you receive updates from your waste or disposal company, forward those updates on to the tenants. Provide them with links to the information so that they can educate themselves on the guidelines and regulations in their area.
Yeah, I will say that since we have been encouraged to recycle and compost here at home, we've been able to swap out our large garbage can to a much smaller one now. And that helped with our trash bill considerably. So, just something to think about. Okay, now for one of our complexes, this is not an issue, but for the other properties we own, it is. And that's parking regulations. If your property has designated parking spaces or a parking lot, it's crucial that you maintain order of it. We suggest that you not allow anything other than moving vehicles in your parking areas and encourage your tenants to store their boats and trailers elsewhere. Have your tenants register their vehicle with you. So you should know the make, the model, the color, and the license plate of each vehicle allowed to park in your parking spaces. Be clear that guests and other vehicles are not allowed and need to utilize public parking spaces instead. We also suggest that you include in your house rules or lease that the vehicles be maintained properly so you don't have to deal with any issues of leaking oil ruining your designated parking spaces or your driveway. All right, speaking of maintenance, consider how long you would allow a tenant to work on their vehicle on your property. And it's fine if you want to allow them to change their oil as long as they do it quickly and keep the area clean. But when they have their old car up on blocks while they change out brakes and tires for weeks on end, then that might become an issue. Be clear on these policies and what the ramifications are if they don't comply.
Yeah, I mean, if I had it my way, I'd rather not deal with parking issues at all. Okay, we have discussed this one in a previous episode. I think it was our three-part series on what we include in our leases, but let's go over guest policies and visitors real quick. It is super important to establish clear guidelines for peaceful living environment while also protecting the tenant's privacy and safety. So here are our tips on guests. Specify the number of guests allowed, any time restrictions, or overnight stay limitations. So I believe on this part, we allow an authorized guest to stay for 3 nights in a month and no more than 21 total nights in a year. Have forms for your tenant to submit the request that will include the guest's name, address, phone, vehicle information, dates visiting, and ask for a copy of their driver's license. This way, if you get a complaint from another tenant or neighbor, You can make sure you're addressing the correct person when you respond. If you have any other restrictions for the guests, like if the guest needs to always be accompanied on the property, or if the tenant is not allowed to share access codes, make sure that is clearly written as well. For the most part, guests will not be an issue. Where they become a problem is if the tenant has a party and things get out of hand. You, as the property owner, are liable for any laws that are broken if you do not have policies in place.
Yeah, or if the guests don't leave.
Yeah, we've had that happen to us too. Now, if you have a single family home rental and there is a family renting it and they want to have a party for the young child, they should contact you to ask permission. And no, you are not going to have a guest form completed for each person. However, you should know about how many guests they're going to be having, how long the event will take place, and at what hours. Now, a 4 year old's birthday party at 1 in the afternoon is likely not as much of an issue as a 21st birthday party that starts at 8 p.m. Again, clearly state the consequences if the guest policy you have is violated.
Well, I don't know about that age difference. We've been to some pretty loud and wild parties for kids. Think about across the street from us every time they have a celebration.
Oh, geez, yeah, I didn't think about that. I mean, some cultures really know how to celebrate, huh?
Yeah. All good clean fun, but a lot of noise up till the 11 p.m. curfew that we have here in the city. Remember that engagement party last summer where the guy a few doors down behind us had all that loud music?
Oh, yeah, wow. I mean, us and our neighbors were all out in front trying to figure out where all the music was coming from, and then the cops showed up and they thought we were at the party.
Yeah. Hey, it was fine with me. I mean, they had great music playing, so
Yeah, that's true. No, if you're going to be loud, have it be good. But our point is here, you guys, that guests are not always people that stay over. It can be parties too. And this is also a good place to note any noise violations that come as a result of a guest as well. Okay, so we do not allow tenants to make alterations and modifications to our rental properties, but if we did, these are the two guidelines we would have them follow. Number one, they need written consent from the landlord before making any alterations to the unit. And number two, the alterations or modifications need to comply with state laws and regulations, meaning they cannot put up walls to make additional bedrooms or workspaces. If you allow them to paint a wall or install shelving units or hang a TV on the wall, they should have to get permission from you first. The reason being is that if they paint the wall black, you are the one that'll have a hell of a time trying to paint back over it at turnover. You are the one who will have to deal with patching the large holes from anchors in the walls when they move out and take the shelving and TV with them.
yeah, you guys, this is exactly why we have it written on an addendum that our tenants are not allowed to have more than 5 holes on a wall, and the holes can't be larger than 1/4 inch in diameter. This is because our walls are textured, and patching those holes are not as simple as throwing up some spackle and calling it a day. The texture needs to be matched so that you don't look like you have all these odd spots all over the walls once it's been repaired. Okay, we're going to try and wrap this up here. The rules, which we have touched on, are noise regulations and quiet hours. We talked about that earlier when we discussed how everyone has a right to peaceful enjoyment. We also touched on maintenance and repairs, but your house rules should state anything that your lease does not already address. And this would be something like allowing your tenant to do repairs on the unit instead of paying someone to go out there and do the work. And this is totally your call. We don't allow it for a couple reasons. First, you don't know the level of expertise that your tenant has and if the job is going to be done to the quality that you would require and expect. And second, often tenants will want a discount on their rent for the service, which we highly do not recommend. Pay them separately if you're going to hire your tenant to complete any of your maintenance. Get a receipt with all the parts that were purchased as well. And we tend to find that the more you allow the tenant to do for a discount, the more they're going to find that needs to be repaired so they can continue to get their rent reduced. And lastly, dealing with disputes between yourself and the tenant, should they not complete the job well or not complete it at all, is also an issue. Our recommendation is to keep your relationship with your tenant professional and only employ licensed or skilled tradesmen to work on your properties for repairs and maintenance.
So you can see where house rules really work hand in hand with your lease. Many of the house rules we mentioned are noted within the body of our lease, but if you have specific rules that are not embodied in your lease or rental agreement, you can use a blank addendum form to add them on. But they must be included in the lease and signed off in agreement by the tenant to be enforceable. You cannot just email a tenant or post rules on a sign. Those are a great way to remind tenants the rules, but they also have to be included in the lease and signed off on. If you made any changes to the rules or your lease, it is best to send them out an email to advise them of the change, and then when their lease expires and if they're renewed, have them sign an updated lease.
Yeah, those are all really good tips there. Let me add that if you have a change that requires the tenant's immediate authorization, you'll need to create a blank addendum and have them sign it to add on to their current lease. And so something like this would be like agreeing to additional fees that they have to pay, like if you're going to switch to utility sharing mid lease. As you know, we love easy landlord forms, and they have many state specific addendum forms to choose from. They have over 200 free forms if you sign up for a free account, or you can pay by form or pay monthly or an annual fee for access to all their forms. We have a 15% discount off on any new purchases you make with Easy Landlord forms. So we'll link them and that code in our show notes. So that is our show for today. A couple quick housekeeping things. First, we now have a link where you can text us questions or, to tell us how much you love us. You can find that link at the top of our show notes that are attached to each podcast episode. We check it a couple times a day, so don't get discouraged if we don't respond right away. And we would love if you would test it out for us and text us a question for our upcoming Q&A episode that we're doing in a few weeks. If you prefer to email us questions, you can do that too, and we'll put the link to our emails in the show notes. We have an online course that we're working on that will walk you through the steps of placing your ideal tenant. It's going to be called From Marketing to Move In, and it's going to cover how best to market your unit with photos and the writing of your ad, showing your unit, accepting applications, and how to vet your applicant. We're also going to teach you about your lease, what it should contain, and what to do before and when your tenant moves into your unit. So, if you've struggled with finding the right tenant to pay rent on time or take care of your unit, this course is for you. You can sign up to get on our wait list and potentially be part of our first beta group by using the link in our show notes. And of course, we have links on there for our free weekly newsletter, all the forms and documents we have created for you to download, most of which are free, our private Facebook group, and all the links to our social media sites for you to follow along. We really appreciate you sharing your time with us today. We are grateful that you find our content useful. And until next time, you've got this, landlords.